When people talk about their favourite Sarah Jane Adventures story, Death of the Doctor is often mentioned, and understandably so, as it's a brilliant couple of episodes. Not only does it see Matt Smith's 11th Doctor meet Sarah Jane for the first, and sadly only time, but it also features Katie Manning return to the role of Jo Grant for the first time in over 35 years. It's the perfect story to connect both Classic Who with New Who, and Russell T Davies's era of the show with Stephen Moffat's. You would have thought then that I too would pick Death of the Doctor as my favourite Sarah Jane Adventures story. However, as much as I adore it, it's not actually my favourite. That title instead belongs to the previous series Doctor Who and Sarah Jane Adventures crossover, The Wedding of Sarah Jane Smith. Here's why. So let's start with the obvious point, the fact that David Tennant makes a guest appearance as the 10th Doctor in this story. Ever since I became a Doctor Who fan, the 10th Doctor has been my favourite Doctor. So naturally, I was thrilled when he made an appearance in the Sarah Jane Adventures. Of course, he'd already had 2 encounters with Sarah Jane before this story, and would later have a brief third in The End of Time Part 2, but this was a chance to see the 10th Doctor interact with the rest of Sarah Jane's gang for the first time. I'm quite glad really that the plot separated the Doctor and Sarah Jane for most of the story's runtime, as it gave us interesting scenes of the Doctor working with Luke, Rani and Clyde to figure out where they were and how to get Sarah Jane back. It also meant we appreciated the few scenes shared between the Doctor and Sarah Jane a lot more. I especially adored the final scene of the episode, where Sarah Jane asks the Doctor if she will ever see him again, to which he responds that he doesn't know, before asking her not to forget him.
Don't forget me, Sarah Jane.
No one's ever going to forget you.
Not only does this hark back to Sarah Jane's exit in The Hand of Fear, but it also serves as a reminder that the Doctor doesn't typically return to see his companions after they stop travelling with him. The fact that the Doctor went out of his way to go to Sarah Jane's wedding to try to prevent her from entering the trap goes to show how much she means to him. It's almost a shame that Sarah Jane sees the Doctor another 2 times after this exchange, as I really think the parting words they share here would have been the perfect ending for the Doctor and Sarah Jane's story. Something else I enjoyed about the 10th Doctor's appearance in this story was how he got to share a scene with the Trickster, arguably the best Sarah Jane Adventures villain. Many have said over the years that the Trickster wouldn't have looked out of place on Doctor Who, which is a sentiment I completely agree with. The concept of manipulating time to cause chaos would fit the show perfectly, with the Trickster's featureless face being memorable and terrifying enough to make an impact amongst all the other great Doctor Who monsters. Sadly though, besides a time beetle from the Trickster's brigade appearing in Turn Left, neither the Trickster or any other being from the Pantheon of Discord has appeared in Doctor Who. With the Sarah Jane Adventures having now ended, I think it's highly unlikely that we'll ever see the Trickster appear in the parent show, so I'm really grateful that the Wedding of Sarah Jane Smith gave us one interaction between the Doctor and the Pantheon of Discord at least. I think the key thing about the 10th Doctor's appearance in the Sarah Jane Adventures is that it couldn't have come at a better time to have as big an impact as it did. In the 365 days before the Wedding of Sarah Jane Smith aired, just 2 episodes of Doctor Who had been on TV, with the most recent one being Planet of the Dead, which aired over 6 months before this story did. I can't speak for everyone else, but 12-year-old me was certainly desperate to see the Doctor again. Not just because we had so few Doctor Who episodes in 2009, but because it was common knowledge by this point that the 10th Doctor's days were numbered. And this is why it's crucial that The Wedding of Sarah Jane Smith aired when it did. Had this story been shown at any other point in the 10th Doctor's run, it may not have been as big a deal. But because it was released at a time where Doctor Who hadn't been on for a while, and everyone knew that the 10th Doctor would soon regenerate, it almost became unmissable TV. Of course, the other thing that made this adventure essentially unmissable was how it marked the very first time that the Doctor crossed over into another show. Nowadays, we're used to shared universes and crossover events, but you have to remember that in 2009, it wasn't really a thing, at least not with family entertainment programmes. Russell T Davies may have successfully proved a Doctor Who universe could work with his 2 spin-off shows and the superb crossover event that was the Doctor Who Series 4 finale, but the Doctor himself had never appeared outside of his own show. I can't stress enough how excited I was for this to change, with the Doctor appearing in the Sarah Jane Adventures for the first time. Hype was built up even more by how much marketing the Doctor's appearance in The Wedding of Sarah Jane Smith had. It seemed to be everywhere in the run-up to the episode's airing. To my surprise, it was even built up in the show, through Sarah Jane being shown visions of the TARDIS in the previous story, The Mad Woman in the Attic, and Luke, Rani and Clyde hearing the sound of the TARDIS throughout part 1 of the story. All of this caused 12-year-old me to view The Wedding of Sarah Jane Smith as being a huge event, which is part of the reason why I love it so much, even now, 10 years on. The 10th Doctor's appearance in The Wedding of Sarah Jane Smith may have been the main reason why it's my favourite Sarah Jane Adventures story, but it's far from the only reason why I adore it so much. Even without the Doctor's involvement, I thought the plot was fantastic. Both School Reunion and the Sarah Jane Adventures pilot Invasion of the Bane had established that Sarah Jane lived quite a lonely life after her travels with the Doctor, so having a story about her finally falling in love was a really good idea. It was refreshing to see Sarah Jane try to live a normal life for a change, with one of my highlights from part 1 being the scene where she tries to make Peter's visit of her house as normal as possible, with hilarious consequences. I loved how much was going on in that scene. Not only did you have Sarah Jane introducing Peter to Luke, but you had Clyde and Rani spying on them, Rani's mum Geeta wanting to meet Peter, a slug-like alien on the loose, and K9 leaving the house to try and stop it. The cliffhanger to part 1 was terrific too. Having the Doctor finally appear at the end of the episode to stop the wedding was a stroke of genius. I'm really surprised it's never been done before in Doctor Who. Part 2 is where the plot really kicks off though, and I'm so glad the episode chose to focus solely on Sarah Jane, her gang, the Doctor, the Trickster, and Peter Dalton, played superbly by Nigel Harvers. It allowed us to spend the most time possible with the characters we cared most for, along with those that mattered most to the story. Again, a genius idea was incorporated in having the characters be trapped in not just a space loop, but 2 different seconds as well. It was a clever way of keeping the characters apart for most of the runtime, whilst also minimising the number of actors and sets required for filming. To bring up the Trickster again, the fact that he is the villain in this story is one of the factors that makes it stand out so much in my mind. I've already mentioned that he wouldn't have looked out of place on Doctor Who due to his terrifying appearance and unique goal of causing chaos throughout time, and it's these traits that make him easily my favourite villain of the Sarah Jane Adventures. Each of the 3 stories he appears in throughout the show are powerful pieces that focus on the character of Sarah Jane and do something exciting with time in the plot. Whatever happened to Sarah Jane Smith shows us a world in which Sarah Jane never existed. The temptation of Sarah Jane Smith sees Sarah Jane go back in time and prevent the death of her parents, and the wedding of Sarah Jane Smith gives Sarah Jane the terrible choice of either giving up the love of her life or the world, all while her and her gang are trapped in different seconds of time. Even though these three stories aren't specifically linked, I personally see them as forming a trilogy, where the stakes get raised with each attempt of the Trickster to stop Sarah Jane from saving the planet. First, he uses a childhood friend against her, then her parents, and then finally, in the wedding of Sarah Jane Smith, he uses the love of her life, with the Doctor ending up getting involved as the threat is so huge. Had Elizabeth Sladen not unfortunately passed away midway through production of Series 5, the Trickster would have appeared for an even greater showdown in the finale, but sadly this was not to be. Nevertheless, the wedding of Sarah Jane Smith is a fitting end to a trilogy of 3 phenomenal Sarah Jane Adventures stories, which is part of the reason I hold it in such high regard. The last thing I want to talk about is the resolution to the plot. I'm a sucker for emotional moments in shows, and my god was the resolution to this story a sad one. Watching Sarah Jane lose the only man besides the Doctor she has ever loved was utterly heartbreaking, and it was made all the more horrible by seeing her have to tell the rest of the wedding guests that the wedding was cancelled after Peter disappeared. Kudos to Elizabeth Sladen for giving arguably her best performance in the entire show in that single moment. You completely believe that her world has just fallen apart from losing someone really special to her. The music that plays over the top of this scene is sombre yet beautiful, and is definitely one of my favourite tracks in the entire show. Very few episodes of the Sarah Jane Adventures have been resolved in such a devastating manner, so the fact that this story ends on such an emotional note makes it really stand out in my mind. Overall, The Wedding of Sarah Jane Smith is my favourite Sarah Jane Adventures story for a variety of reasons. Of course, a lot of my appreciation comes from the fact that my favourite Doctor made a guest appearance in it, but that is far from the only reason why I love it so much. It marked the very first time that the Doctor had crossed over into another show, and, in my eyes, it set the template for how the Doctor's appearance in a spin-off should be handled. The story should revolve around the main character of the spin-off, with the Doctor acting more like a sidekick, and appearing for more than just a brief cameo. The other thing The Wedding of Sarah Jane Smith did was act as a terrific trilogy closer to 3 brilliant stories involving the Trickster, my favourite and arguably the best Sarah Jane Adventures villain. However, it's the plot that truly makes this story shine. It's a rare opportunity to see Sarah Jane truly happy in a story that, for the most part, strips things back to just the main cast. This adventure seems to have everything. A brilliant cast, great comedic moments and moments grounded in reality, unique sci-fi ideas, an exciting cliffhanger, and, of course, a heartbreaking ending. And that's why I love it so much. Thank you very much for watching this video. If you enjoyed hearing what I had to say, please do leave a like, and feel free to comment down below what you think of The Wedding of Sarah Jane Smith, or what your favourite Sarah Jane Adventures story is. I shall see you all next time.